I just finished a very long trip, about 4,500 kilometers of traveling, and I've arrived. So I want to continue the story of the Tenant of Wildfell Hall. We're on chapter 42, a Reformation. September 1st. No Mr. Huntingdon yet. Perhaps he will stay among his friends till Christmas, and then next spring he will be off again. If he continue this plan, I shall be able to stay at Grassdale well enough. That is, I shall be able to stay, and that is enough. Even an occasional bevy of friends at the shooting season may be borne if Arthur gets so firmly attached to me, so well established in good sense and principles before they come, that I will be able, by reason and affection, to keep him pure from their contaminations. Vain hope, I fear, but still, till such a time of trial comes, I will forbear to think of my quiet asylum in the beloved old hall. Mr. and Mrs. Hattersley have been staying at the Grove a fortnight, and as Mr. Hargrave is still absent and the weather was remarkably fine, I never passed a day without seeing my two friends, Milicent and Esther, either here or there. On one occasion, when Mr. Hattersley had driven them over to Grassdale in the phaeton, with little Helen and Ralph, and we were all enjoying ourselves in the garden, I had a few minutes' conversation with that gentleman, while the ladies were amusing themselves with the children. "Do you want to hear anything of your husband, Mrs. Huntingdon?" said he. "No, unless you can tell me when to expect him home." "I can't. You don't want him, do you?" said he, with a broad grin. "No." "Well, I think you're better without him, sure enough, for my part. I'm downright weary of him. I told him I'd leave him if he didn't mend his manners, and he wouldn't. So I left him. You see, I'm a better man than you think me, and what's more, I have serious thoughts of washing my hands of him entirely, and the whole set of 'em, and comporting myself from this day forward with all decency and sobriety as a Christian and the father of a family should do. What do you think of that? It's a resolution you ought to have formed long ago. Well, I'm not 30 yet. It isn't too late, is it? No, it is never too late to reform, as long as you have the sense to desire it and the strength to execute your purpose. Well, to tell you the truth, I've thought of it often and often before, but he's such devilish good company, is Huntingdon. After all, you can't imagine what a jovial good fellow he is when he's not fairly drunk, only just primed or half seas over. We all have a bit of a liking for him at the bottom of our hearts, though we can't respect him. But should you wish yourself to be like him? No, I'd rather be like myself, bad as I am. You can't continue bad as you are without getting worse and more brutalized every day, and therefore more like him. I could not help smiling at the comical, half angry, half confounded look he put on at this rather unusual mode of address. "Never mind my plain speaking," said I. "It is from the best of motives. But tell me, should you wish your sons to be like Mr. Huntingdon, or even like yourself?" "Hang it, no." "Should you wish your daughter to despise you, or at least to feel no vestige of respect for you, and no affection but what is mingled with the bitterest regret?" "Oh, blast it! No, I couldn't stand that." "And finally, should you wish your wife to be ready to sink into the earth when she hears you mentioned, and to loathe the very sound of your voice, and shudder as you approach?" "She never will. She likes me all the same, whatever I do." "Impossible, Mr. Hattersley. You mistake her quiet submission for affection." "Fire and fury!" "Now, don't burst into a tempest at that. I don't mean to say that she does not love you. She does, I know, a great deal better than you deserve. But I'm quite sure that if you behave better, she will love you more. And if you behave worse, she will love you less and less, till all is lost in fear, aversion, and bitterness of soul, if not in secret hatred and contempt. But dropping the subject of affection, should you wish to be the tyrant of her life, to take away all the sunshine from her existence and make her thoroughly miserable?" "Of course not, and I don't, and I'm not going to." "You have done more towards it than you suppose. Pooh, pooh! She's not the susceptible, anxious, worriting creature you imagine. She's a little meek, peaceable, affectionate body, apt to be rather sulky at times, but quiet and cool in the main, and ready to take things as they come. Think of what she was 5 years ago when you married her and what she is now. I know she was a little plump lassie then, with a pretty pink and white face. Now she's a poor little bit of a creature, fading and melting away like a snow wreath. But hang it, by Jupiter, that's not my fault. What is the cause of it then? Not years, for she's only 5 and 20. It's her own delicate health, and confound it, madam, what would you make of me and the children, to be sure, that worry her to death between them? No, Mr. Hattersley, the children give her more pleasure than pain. They are fine, well dispositioned children. I know they are, bless 'em. Then why lay the blame on them? I'll tell you what it is. It's silent fretting and constant anxiety on your account, mingled, I suspect, with something of bodily fear on her own. When you behave well, she can only rejoice with trembling. She has no security, no confidence in your judgment or principles, but is continually dreading the close of such short lived felicity. When you behave ill, her causes of terror and misery are more than anyone can tell but herself. In patient endurance of evil, she forgets it is our duty to admonish our neighbors of their transgressions. Since you will mistake her silence for indifference, come with me and I'll show you one or two of her letters. No breach of confidence, I hope, since you are her other half. He followed me into the library. I sought out and put into his hands two of Millicent's letters, one dated from London and written during one of his wildest seasons of reckless dissipation, the other in the country during a lucid interval. The former was full of trouble and anguish, not accusing him, but deeply regretting his connection with his profligate companions, abusing Mr. Grimsby and others, insinuating bitter things against Mr. Huntingdon, and most ingeniously throwing the blame of her husband's misconduct onto other men's shoulders. The latter was full of hope and joy, yet with a trembling consciousness that this happiness would not last, praising his goodness to the skies, but with an evident, though but half expressed wish that it were based on a surer foundation than the natural impulses of the heart, and a half prophetic dread of the fall of that house so founded on the sand, which fall had shortly after taken place, as Hattersley must have been conscious while he read. Almost at the commencement of the first letter, I had the unexpected pleasure of seeing him blush, but he immediately turned his back to me and finished the perusal at the window. At the second, I saw him once or twice raise his hand and hurriedly pass it across his face. Could it have been to dash away a tear? When he had done, there was an interval spent in clearing his throat and staring out of the window, and then, after whistling a few bars of his favorite air, he turned around and gave me back the letters and silently shook me by the hand. I've been a cursed rascal, God knows, said he, as he gave it a hearty squeeze. But you see, if I don't make amends for it, curse word, me if I don't. Don't curse yourself, Mr. Hattersley. If God had heard half your invocations of that kind, you would have been in hell long before now, and you cannot make amends for the past by doing your duty for the future, inasmuch as your duty is only what you owe to your Maker, and you cannot do more than fulfill it. Another must make amends for your past delinquencies. If you intend to reform, invoke God's blessing, his mercy, and his aid, not his curse. God help me then, for I'm sure I need it. Where's Milicent? She's there, just coming in with her sister. He stepped out at the glass door and went to meet them. I followed at a little distance. Somewhat to his wife's astonishment, he lifted her off from the ground and saluted her with a hearty kiss and a strong embrace. Then, placing his two hands on her shoulders, he gave her, I suppose, a sketch of the great things he meant to do, for she suddenly threw her arms around him and burst into tears, exclaiming, Do, do, Ralph, we shall be so happy. How very, very good you are. Nay, not I, said he, turning her round and pushing her towards me. Thank her. It's her doing. Millicent flew to thank me, overflowing with gratitude. I disclaimed all title to it, telling her her husband was predisposed to amendment before I added my mite of exhortation and encouragement, and that I had only done what she might and ought to have done herself. Oh, no, cried she, I couldn't have influenced him, I'm sure, by anything I could have said. I should only have bothered him by my clumsy efforts at persuasion if I had made the attempt. You never tried me, Milly, said he. Shortly after, they took their leave. They are now gone on a visit to Hattersley's father. After that, they will repair to their country home. I hope his good resolutions will not fall through, and poor Millicent will not be again disappointed. Her last letter was full of present bliss and pleasing anticipations for the future, but no particular temptation has yet occurred to put his virtue to the test. Henceforth, however, she will doubtless be somewhat less timid and reserved, and he more kind and thoughtful. Surely, then, her hopes are not unfounded, and I have one bright spot at least whereon to rest my thoughts. End of chapter 42. Chapter 43. The Boundary Passed. October 10th. Mr. Huntingdon returned about 3 weeks ago. His appearance, his demeanor, and conversation, and my feelings with regard to him, I shall not trouble myself to describe. The day after his arrival, however, he surprised me by the announcement of an intention to procure a governess for little Arthur. I told him it was quite unnecessary, not to say ridiculous. At the present season, I thought I was fully competent to the task of teaching him myself, for some years to come at least. The child's education was the only pleasure and business of my life, and since he had deprived me of every other occupation, he might surely leave me that. He said I was not fit to teach children or to be with them. I had already reduced the boy to little better than an automaton. I had broken his fine spirit with my rigid severity, and I should freeze all the sunshine out of his heart and make him as gloomy an ascetic as myself if I had the handling of him much longer. And poor Rachel, too, came in for her share of abuse as usual. He cannot endure Rachel, because he knows that she has a proper appreciation of him. I calmly defended our several qualifications as nurse and governess, and still resisted the proposed addition to our family, but he cut me short by saying it was no use bothering about the matter, for he had engaged a governess already, and she was coming next week, so that all I had to do was to get things ready for her reception. This was a rather startling piece of intelligence. I ventured to inquire her name and address, by whom she had been recommended, or how he had been led to make choice of her. She is a very estimable, pious young person, said he. You needn't be afraid. Her name is Myers, I believe, and she was recommended to me by a respectable old dowager, a lady of high repute in the religious world. I have not seen her myself, and therefore cannot give you a particular account of her person and conversation, and so forth. But if the old lady's eulogies are correct, you will find her to possess all desirable qualifications for her position, an inordinate love of children among the rest. All this was very gravely and quietly spoken, but there was a laughing demon in his half-averted eye that boded no good, I imagined. However, I thought of my asylum in shire, and made no further objections. When Miss Myers arrived, I was not prepared to give her a very cordial reception. Her appearance was not particularly calculated to produce a favorable impression at first sight, nor did her manners and subsequent conduct in any degree remove the prejudice I had already conceived against her. Her attainments were limited, her intelligence no ways above mediocrity. She had a fine voice and could sing like a nightingale and accompany herself sufficiently well on the piano, but these were her only accomplishments. There was a look of guile and subtlety in her face, a sound of it in her voice. She seemed afraid of me, and would start if I suddenly approached her. In her behavior she was respectful and complaisant, even to servility. She attempted to flatter and fawn upon me at first, but I soon checked that. Her fondness for her little pupil was overstrained, and I was obliged to remonstrate with her on the subject of overindulgence and injudicious praise, but she could not gain his heart. Her piety consisted in an occasional heaving of sighs and uplifting of eyes to the ceiling, and the utterance of a few cant phrases. She told me she was a clergyman's daughter and had been left an orphan from her childhood, but had had the good fortune to obtain a situation in a very pious family. And then she spoke so gratefully of the kindness she had experienced from its different members that I reproached myself for my uncharitable thoughts and unfriendly conduct and relented for a time, but not for long. My causes of dislike were too rational, my suspicions too well founded for that, and I knew it was my duty to watch and scrutinize till those suspicions were either satisfactorily removed or confirmed. I asked the name and residence of the kind and pious family. She mentioned a common name and an unknown and distant place of abode, but told me that they were now on the continent and their present address was unknown to her. I never saw her speak much to Mr. Huntingdon, but he would frequently look into the schoolroom to see how little Arthur got on with his new companion when I was not there. In the evening she sat with us in the drawing room and would sing and play to amuse him, or us, as she pretended, and was very attentive to his wants and watchful to anticipate them, though she only talked to me. Indeed, he was seldom in a condition to be talked to. Had she been other than she was, I should have felt her presence a great relief to come between us thus, except, indeed, that I should have been thoroughly ashamed for any decent person to see him as he often was. I did not mention my suspicions to Rachel, but she, having sojourned for half a century in this land of sin and sorrow, had learned to be suspicious herself. She told me from the first she was down of that new governess, and I soon found she watched her quite as narrowly as I did, and I was glad of it, for I longed to know the truth. The atmosphere of Grassdale seemed to stifle me, and I could only live by thinking of Wildfell Hall. At last one morning she entered my chamber with such intelligence that my resolution was taken before she had ceased to speak. While she dressed me, I explained to her my intentions and what assistance I should require from her, and told her which of my things she was to pack up and what she was to leave behind for herself, as I had no other means of recompensing her for this sudden dismissal after her long and faithful service, a circumstance I most deeply regretted but could not avoid. "And what will you do, Rachel?" said I. "Will you go home or seek another place?" "I have no home, ma'am, but with you," she replied. "And if I leave you, I'll never go into place again as long as I live." "But I can't afford to live like a lady now," returned I. "I must be my own maid and my child's nurse." "What signifies?" replied she in some excitement. "You'll want somebody to clean and wash and cook, won't you? I can do all that, and never mind the wages. I've my bits of savings yet, and if you wouldn't take me, I should have to find my own board and lodging somewhere, or else work among strangers, and it's what I'm not used to. So you can please yourself, ma'am." Her voice quavered as she spoke, and the tears stood in her eyes. "I should like it above all things, Rachel, and I'll give you such wages as I could afford, such as I should give to any servant of all work I might employ. But don't you like it? But don't you see as I should be dragging you down with me when you have done nothing to deserve it?" "Oh, fiddle!" ejaculated she. "And besides, my future way of living will be so widely different to the past, so different to all you've been accustomed to. Do you think, ma'am, I can't bear what my missus can? Surely I'm not so proud and so dainty as that comes to, and my little master, too, God bless him. But I'm young, Rachel. I shan't mind it. And Arthur is young, too. It will be nothing to him. Nor me either. I'm not so old, but what I can stand hard fare and hard work, if it's only to help and comfort them, as I've loved like my own barns. For all, I'm too old to bide the thought of leaving 'em in trouble and danger and going amongst strangers." "Then you shan't, Rachel," cried I, embracing my faithful friend. "We'll all go together, and you shall see how the new life suits you." "Bless you, honey," cried she affectionately, returning my embrace. "Only let us get shut of this wicked house, and we'll do right enough. You'll see." "So think I," was my answer, and so that point was settled. By the morning's post, I dispatched a few hasty lines to Frederick, beseeching him to prepare my asylum for my immediate reception, for I should probably come to claim it within a day after the receipt of that note. And telling him in a few words the cause of my sudden resolution, I then wrote 3 letters of adieu. The first to Esther Hargrave, in which I told her that I found it impossible to stay any longer at Grassdale, or to leave my son under his father's protection, and as it was of the last importance that our future abode should be unknown to him and his acquaintance, I should disclose it to no one but my brother, through the medium of whom I hoped still to correspond with my friends. I then gave her his address, exhorted her to write frequently, reiterated some of my former admonitions regarding her own concerns, and bade her a fond farewell. The second was to Milicent, much to the same effect, but a little more confidential, as befitted our longer intimacy, and her greater experience and better acquaintance with my circumstances. The third was to my aunt, a much more difficult and painful undertaking, and therefore I had left it to the last. But I must give her some explanation of the extraordinary step I had taken, and that quickly, for she and my uncle would no doubt hear of it within a day or two after my disappearance, as it was probable that Mr. Huntingdon would speedily apply to them to know what was become of me. At last, however, I told her I was sensible of my error. I did not complain of its punishment, and I was sorry to trouble my friends with its consequences, but in duty to my son I must submit no longer. It was absolutely necessary that he should be delivered from his father's corrupting influence. I should not disclose my place of refuge even to her, in order that she and my uncle might be able with truth to deny all knowledge concerning it. But any communications addressed to me under cover to my brother would be certain to reach me. I hoped she and my uncle would pardon the step I had taken, for if they knew all, I was sure they would not blame me, and I trusted they would not afflict themselves on my account. For if I could only reach my retreat in safety and keep it unmolested, I should be very happy but for the thought of them, and should be quite contented to spend my life in obscurity, devoting myself to the training up of my child, and teaching him to avoid the errors of both his parents. These things were done yesterday. I have given 2 whole days to the preparation for our departure, that Frederick may have more time to prepare the rooms, and Rachel to pack up the things, for the latter task must be done with the utmost caution and secrecy, and there is no one here but me to assist her. I can help to get the articles together, but I do not understand the art of stowing them into the boxes so as to take up the smallest possible space. And there are her own things to do as well as mine and Arthur's. I can ill afford to leave anything behind, since I have no money except a few guineas in my purse. And besides, as Rachel observed, whatever I left would most likely become the property of Miss Myers, and I should not relish that. But what trouble I have had throughout these 2 days struggling to appear calm and collected, to meet him and her as usual, when I was obliged to meet them, and forcing myself to leave my little Arthur in her hands for hours together. But I trust these trials are over now. I have laid him in my bed for a better security, and never more, I trust, shall his innocent lips be defiled by their contaminating kisses, or his young ears polluted by their words. But shall we escape in safety? Oh, that the morning were come, and we were on our way at least. This evening, when I had given Rachel all the assistance I could, and had nothing left me but to wait, and wish, and tremble, I became so greatly agitated that I knew not what to do. I went down to dinner, but I could not force myself to eat. Mr. Huntingdon remarked the circumstance. "What's to do with you now?" said he, when the removal of the second course gave him time to look about him. "I am not well," I replied. "I think I must lie down a little. You won't miss me much?" "Not in the least. If you leave your chair, it'll do just as well, better a trifle," he muttered as I left the room, "for I can fancy somebody else fills it." Somebody else may fill it tomorrow, I thought, but did not say. "There, I've seen the last of you, I hope," I muttered as I closed the door upon him. Rachel urged me to seek repose at once, to recruit my strength for tomorrow's journey, as we must be gone before the dawn. But in my present state of nervous excitement, that was entirely out of the question. It was equally out of the question to sit or wander about my room, counting the hours, and the minutes between me and the appointed time of action, straining my ears and trembling at every sound, lest someone should discover and betray us after all. I took up a book and tried to read. My eyes wandered over the pages, but it was impossible to bind my thoughts to their contents. Why not have recourse to the old expedient and add this last event to my chronicle? I opened its pages once more and wrote the above account, with difficulty at first, but gradually my mind became more calm and steady. Thus several hours have passed away. The time is drawing near, and now my eyes feel heavy and my frame exhausted. I will commend my cause to God, and then lie down and gain an hour or two of sleep, and then little Arthur sleeps soundly. All the house is still. There can be no one watching. The boxes were all corded by Benson and quietly conveyed down the back stairs after dusk and sent away in a cart to the M coach office. The name upon the cards was Mrs. Graham, which appellation I mean henceforth to adopt. My mother's maiden name was Graham, and therefore I fancy I have some claim to it, and prefer it to any other except my own, which I dare not resume. End of chapter 43.